Welcome everyone, Kevin Carpenter, CppNow volunteer this time, here with Ben Deane. And we're going to talk about his talk that he's got coming up and just being a long-term attendee at CppNow in general. Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Kevin. I first came to CppNow in 2014. I'd never heard of it before then, and actually it came up as like a random conference that the company would send people to. For some reason that year, I was working at Blizzard. There was a drive, I guess, to send every engineer to one conference a year. And so there was an internal web page where this whole list of conferences, and one of them was actually in 2013. Some folks had been to BoostCon, as was.
Yep.
That's why it was on the list. Right. Anyway, I came along in 2014, and I ended up getting a ticket really late. In fact, it was like a cancellation. And anyway, I loved the experience so much in 2014 that I came away and thinking, how can I come back next year? How can I ensure my place? And so in order to like sidestep the company policy of like travel and whatever, I'm like, well, I'll just submit the talk, and if it gets accepted, then it's a fait accompli, right? And then the company will
have to go.
Because there was this weird thing where the budget for conference tickets was separate from the travel budget. So one was very tightly constrained, but the other one, so if I got a conference ticket, the travel would be easy to swing, right? So I went in 2014, met a bunch of people, came back in 2015 as a speaker, and the only one I've missed since then, apart from the pandemic when it didn't happen for 1 year, the one I missed 2016. I was a bit mad at my brother. He decided to get married that week in May. So I had to go to England instead of Aspen.
Oh, tough. So what's your favorite part about CppNow? I mean, if you think of all the years that you've gone, can you pick one thing that sticks out to you?
Well, I think it's just the whole experience. I always come away with so many new ideas. It's just like that's the week of the year when it's full on C++.
Right.
Like, it's like, as you know, it's like 6 days, early starts, late finishes, all C++ all the time, and there's just so much exchange of ideas. Like I come away from that conference completely, drained physically, but mentally energized. Like so many things I need to try. That's kind of, I guess, the best part of it for me.
It's funny. I was just thinking back because you were talking about how you were trying to make sure to secure your ticket. And, last year was kind of small. And so last year was my first year of experiencing the conference. And I think we only had like 70 people. And, this year we're at 127 or 128 now. And so we're close to selling out because we always, it's like a limited.
50 max or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, to your point, it's like even last year when we were talking to people hanging out at the resort, it's nice because it's not it's small, right? You really get a chance to interact with everyone.
Right. And having met people at CppNow, then it's like when you go to other conferences, CppCon, Cpp North, whatever they might be, it's like you already have a group of friends that you've met from Aspen.
Yeah.
It's like within the conference, you have friends already. Yeah.
It is amazing how many of us get around from conference to conference. I mean, I was laughing because you were like, I secured my ticket by doing talks. And, I haven't done that many talks. I'm fortunate to get to do one this year at Core, so I volunteered. That was my securing the ticket.
Yeah. I started giving talks because there were talks that I wanted to exist in the world. I wanted to watch these talks, and they didn't exist. Yep. And so I thought, well, I better give them so that they do exist.
And I gotta say, like, I find all of your talks really interesting just because of the depth. I mean, when I've listened to your talks, there's definitely things that push the boundaries of what I understand. Of course, the cool part is I can always come to ask you questions. And I think that's the other thing that's nice. Like all the speakers at conferences are more approachable than I think a new person thinks, that.
Absolutely. And so 2015, the first year, so 2014 was my first year. I came out 2015 to give a talk. That was the first conference talk I ever gave in Flug, in front of a room full of experts, right? Which many would view as quite daunting. Like you're up there as a speaker, and in the audience are library implementers and standards contributors and people who are experts on stuff that you're talking about. And it's certainly, it can be slightly daunting, but it's also it's a real friendly atmosphere in Aspen. Like, it's real collegiate atmosphere. And if you get a question that you don't know the answer to, you can ask someone in the audience who will know, right?
Yeah. It is far more that way than I think any of the other conferences. There's far more of an exchange going on in any of the talks that are being given.
Yeah, for sure.
It definitely is.
The videos get flack on YouTube because of that, because they're so, part of the conference is so much like, this isn't like the person at the front's not bringing stone tablets and handing out the knowledge.
Right.
It's really a interchange of ideas.
It'll be interesting to see, because as I understand, we're actually trying some new miking this year at the conference so that they're able to capture what the audience is asking better. And so
that's good. Okay.
I don't know if it's going to be in every room, but it'll be cool to see how that plays out.
Yes. Well, I saw that we have a new room. I think it's like one of the hotel conference rooms, which is next to the physics center.
We did. We had to do that for the keynotes because we have as double what we had last year for people coming. And so, in order to hold a keynote, you have to fit everyone in the room. So that's going to be exciting. That's for sure.
Well, that's good. The room mics have always been a challenge. One year we had like a throwable mic that kind of works a little bit. When people threw it, it worked, but there was always a delay in handing the mic over,
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the point where it's like, if you really want to, you can watch the videos after, but you want to be there if you can, especially this conference, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One year, that reminds me. One year we had, I think it was 2017, because it was the year I did the talk with Jason, context for all the things. And that year there was a push to caption the talks, right?
Oh,
And I think there was either volunteer captioners or I can't remember if it was that year or the year after, when there was some captioning done anyway.
Yeah.
But as a speaker, it was a case of like, you want to go in and caption your own talk if you can spare the time. I mean, it's time consuming.
Yes.
And Google auto captions don't know C++ keywords, right? To a first approximation. Like, they certainly didn't know const expra. You can imagine how many times that word in particular came up. But one of the things I could do also in captioning was, although the room audio wasn't great, I found that if I put it up to max volume, I could hear the questions.
Yeah.
And because I knew the person who was talking, I recognized their voice, and so I was able to caption who asked the question.
Oh yeah.
For like 90% of the questions at least, which was pretty cool.
That is. So, the talk that I had down here that you're giving is the Calendrical C++, Standard Chrono, History, Mathematics, and the Computus. And so you can tell us about that one, but I know, we were talking before, you actually have two talks. So plug your talks. What are you excited about?
So, that first one is on Monday first thing, Monday afternoon. And it's all about, so last year, sometime last year, about this time last year, I went down the rabbit hole of just reading about and just absorbing all kinds of knowledge about calendars, and in particular, I bought tons of books from Amazon. I read a lot, and I was reading about like the history of the Western calendar in particular, I guess we could say. So everything from like the days of the Roman Republic, and then the Julian calendar reforms, and then the early Christian Church and their attempts to figure out when Easter is, moving through to the the 500s, the 600s, the 700s, and then in the 1500s, Pope Gregory and the Gregorian calendar reform. But anyway, there's a whole rabbit hole. I'm just giving you just like a second spiel here, but there's so much information, and it struck me that the date part of chrono, we have it now. Howard gave some talks on it some years ago now, like when it was new.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen much about it, and so I thought, well, can I somehow tie these things together, and can I make a good talk of like these calculations, because it's not too far off the mark to say that before about the 1600s, most progress in Western mathematics was driven by trying to figure out when Easter falls.
Oh, wow.
And it's actually a really difficult problem.
Yeah.
So the talk is about that. That's the Computus part of the talk. If you're wondering what Computus means.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, Computus with a small c in general means calendrical calculations. Okay. And in particular, the Computus is sometimes used to mean how to figure out when Easter falls.
Gotcha.
Anyway, I had done so much, I'd geeked out about this so much that my wife said to me, you better make a talk out of this and actually get some currency out of it, like submit to a conference and get something out of this that you've been geeking out on for the past 9 months. And so that's where it came from.
That's funny. I was going to say, like, when you were talking about all the books that you got, I remember being on I was on one of the meetups that we were just doing. I'm trying to remember, Connor, I think, when he was doing his book by chapter, and I just remember seeing your bookcases behind you, and I thought you actually lived in a library. It just kind of looked that way.
I am a huge fan of books, and to be honest, I buy more books than I have time to read.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find books very, just comforting, and I do read them when I get a chance, and
But I think it's, so when I was talking about like listening to your talks and things, for me it shows. Just anytime that I've seen one of your talks, the ease with which you speak and explain things, I've always greatly appreciated. And to that end, my wife will sit there and have you read that book yet? Okay, you're not getting a new one until you finish that one you have. So kudos to your wife for letting you have that collection.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes from, when a long time ago, I was talking, and this was like near the beginning of my career. I was a new graduate or something, and I was talking to a colleague, and I said, we were talking about books and buying books and reading them, and someone said, I forget who it was, but they said something to me that stuck in my head, and it was just like, well, I don't give myself a budget for books. I just buy whatever seems good, so I don't have an upper bound. Now, obviously, we'll have an upper bound eventually, but to first of all, it's not like I budget myself that hard for books. So,
yeah,
for better or worse.
So, what was the second talk you're doing on Thursday, isn't it?
Yeah, the second talk is about applicative functors, which is a particular functional pattern. Okay. Right? I hear a lot about monads.
Yeah.
And when people explain monads, they tend to also explain functors. So and this is, functional patterns have influenced C++ a lot. C++ is this multi-paradigm language.
Yeah.
Functional programming paradigms have a currency in C++ these days. But people tend to hear about monad and hear about functor, and they don't hear about applicative. And I think applicative is, it's super useful. Like it's sort of, so the subtitle of my talk is like the forgotten functional pattern, because you don't hear much about it. And yeah, it's very useful. It has tons of applications. And to be honest, the talk was partly spurred by my reading the monthly papers that come out of the C++ standards. The C++ papers come out every month, and so I'm reading through some of those, or at least I'm reading through the titles and I'm reading the ones that interest me,
Yeah.
as many people might do. Um, and I see things being proposed, and a lot of things. So some things explicitly say, here's some functional patterns, like we have monadic interface on optional, and we have monadic interface on expected.
Yep.
Right? And some things don't explicitly make reference to the functional patterns, but they are there.
Right.
Things like senders and receivers, right?
Okay.
Which, with the hood, totally based on functional patterns, or at least in part.
Right.
But then there are other papers that present issues in the language or in the library and ways to solve them. And I look at the paper and I think, applicative solves this. This is what applicative is for. Why isn't this paper mentioning applicative? And I'm looking for mentions of applicative, and it never gets any currency. It's like people have forgotten it exists. But there are particular reasons that I hope to elucidate in my talk that I think it's much more useful than just monads, which everyone's heard about, right?
So I'll have to see it just for the fact of learning more of how applicative is used, because I'm still learning. It's like I've started. When I learned programming, I started with Turbo Pascal. I mean, that was the first probably structured, and so everything. That was more the top down, but then you got to Turbo Pascal, and so I grew up object oriented, I guess is where I'm going.
Okay.
And as I've been going back through over the past couple of years, trying to get better with design patterns, pulling things out of classes so much, doing more free functions, and learning more about functional programming. Your talk on that'll be the one that I go to, that I bring a life preserver, because it'll keep me from drowning. But it'll be one of those ones that'll push my level enough that, and I think that's one of the things. So I'm mentioning it because Inbal and I were talking. It's like, if there's someone new to the conference, it's like, don't be scared to go into a talk that.
Absolutely.
You know where I'm going with that, right?
I hope that my talks are accessible, and most of the talks I find at CppNow are very accessible, right?
Yeah.
Even if you don't know much about the domain or the paradigm.
Well, no, and so that's where I was saying, like, especially with the talks and the things that I've, when we've interacted before, you do make things very accessible, and that's the part where I'm like, even for the things that are still that part that I haven't hit yet, I will get that 20% that helps me get over that hump, and that's the part that I think is great about the talks.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe that's because my background is games programming, and that's just straight out hacking, not knowing what you're doing to start with, right? When I look back at the code I wrote 20 years ago, it's like, oh my goodness, it was terrible. It was like just awful. And then I took this kind of detour, and around about 2007, 2008, I learned Haskell.
Okay.
And then in the early teens, I guess around 2011 through 2013, I used to go to this really great functional Haskell meetup in Santa Monica. It was great. It was a very small meetup. It was like a dozen regulars, maybe. But we all made the time every month, and we went through a course on Haskell together. Was one of the things. And yeah, I mean, this was like a 2 hours there, and
right.
part of 2 hours back drive for me, because it's like,
oh wow,
on the 405.
Yep.
I was going from Irvine to Santa Monica in rush hour, which, if you know Southern California,
yes.
that's a bit of a drive.
That's commitment.
Yeah, but yeah, that gave me a really good understanding of functional programming through Haskell. And then, what I try to do now in my talks is show not just, well, I've never really dived into like theoretical, like category theory and all that. Like, I'm aware kind of the ideas, and I know how it informs functional programming, but I like to keep stuff grounded in practice. And in particular, if you're applying functional ideas to C++, it can look very different from applying them to Haskell.
Okay.
So one of my hopes is that my talks kind of achieve that grounding.
Well, like I said, everything that I've seen from you before has been consumable. So I will look forward to seeing those.
Cool.
So anything else you want to add before we call it? Because we're 10 days out and everyone's getting ready to go.
I'm really looking forward to it. It's like, yeah, just over a week away, and the drive's going to be beautiful. I'll be carpooling from Denver to Aspen with a colleague who's flying into Denver, and yeah,
Nice.
it'll be great.
Yeah, we've got the drive up from Arizona, so a little bit further than you, but looking forward to it too, because we're hitting 90s down here, and we saw that it snowed the other night, and we know that this week it's like we had snow last year for a night. That was really kind of cool, and then it was gone the next day.
Nice.
So
Well, coming from Arizona, probably then the dryness doesn't hit you so much.
yeah, no,
It's okay for you. When I found when I first came to Aspen, it was like super dry, as well as being at altitude, which really doesn't affect. It's not too bad for me, but the dryness was noticeable.
yeah, no,
Now I'm a Colorado native. I could say that, I suppose. 5 years. So yeah, I'm used to that now.
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate you giving me time today. I look forward to seeing you at Aspen. And for anyone else that's looking to come, make sure you get over and register. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Kevin.